Hey there, beautiful people. I wanted to touch in on a conversation that actually was inspired by one of our connection calls. And I'm going to give a little bit of context because some of you were at the call, some of you weren't at the call. And so just kind of want to broaden the conversation just to give those that weren't there some insight. So we were discussing on the call the difference between being the rescuer or savior versus being someone that supports and nurtures. And so if we extrapolate that into what that means in our lives, like sometimes a person will embody the archetype of, let's just say, rescuer. And not that anything is inherently wrong or right about that word. It's not a good or a bad word. More of where I try to focus is, are we in the shadow or the virtue of that word? Because when we're in a shadow of any archetypal behavioral pattern, so if you are being the rescuer and you are in shadow, typically someone is getting harmed. Either your behavior is harming them, their behavior is harming you, or your behavior is harming yourself. And that's usually a very healthy checkpoint just to notice if you are in shadow of any particular identity marker, right? Archetype, personality trait, the role that you take on in life. When we're in virtue, there is a healthy balance between what we can do or what we are doing, and it's not harming anyone. Right. And so on this call, we were talking about the difference between that and what it looks like for someone that takes on the archetype of being the rescuer. And in my realm, the people that I tend to attract, because I also am this, is the caregivers, the people pleasers, the doormat kind of energy people. And I say that with all the compassion and all the grace because I too have been those things, right? But just giving language to those archetypes. We're talking about how, like, where is the line? Whenever those sensitive ones, the people pleasers, the peacekeepers, the don't rock the boat people, like there's a lot of connotations that describe this kind of person. How does that kind of person care for the people in their life without going into the shadow version of caretaking? And it opens up this really broad conversation. And I know I'm kind of rambling a little bit because it hits a lot of different areas. This isn't just a black and white situation. It can go from the smallest scenario to the grandest, to the biggest, to the scariest. It can go from your little 1-year-old trying to hold their sippy cup for the first time and they're frustrated and they don't have the dexterity or something like that, right? Or they're trying to learn how to color with a crayon and they're getting frustrated, to the nth degree of having someone in our lives that are entertaining suicide ideation, right? So the vast spectrum of how do we show up for our people. And what gets very interesting around that is obviously the intensity of the outcome. If your little 1-year-old doesn't color within the lines or they don't want to color anymore, it's not the end of the world. But if you have this going down this spectrum of intensity and you have these other experiences, these can be earth-shattering for us and other people, right? And so the question is, where does that rescuer or caregiver, where do they show up to the point where it's not enabling and it's not harming them or you? And it starts going into a philosophical conversation for me about what is appropriate, what is our responsibility, right? Because when we talk about other people's free will, therein lies the answer is that all across the spectrum, anywhere you're going to land on your experience, all through that, from the least to the most intense, right? Every person is responsible for themselves. Now, to say that to an empath, a caregiver, a people pleaser, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to say that to somebody like us is to make it sound like we are supposed to be heartless, that we are supposed, like, in order to have boundaries, we're supposed to not care at all. And to the people pleaser, the caregiver, that's excruciating and it's impossible because we're completely wired to care. I'm not saying other people aren't, but you understand what I'm saying. Very, very specifically talking to the people that resonate with some of those terms, okay? So let me just take a big breath around that because it gets to be a big conversation in my body. And so whenever we're talking about how much do you show up for someone, it's not all or nothing. It's not like, let's just take the person in our life that is revolving around suicide ideation. I've experienced it. I've had people in my life experience it. So, let's just take that experience, right, as the example. Where is the limit of how we show up? Like, where is the point when we're showing up to help? Where is our support? Where does it go too far into enabling? And then where does it go too far that we are keeping them alive? And I know, please understand, I get the gravity of this conversation. So I would like to just collectively take a big breath. Because to say to the people pleaser, it's their choice, feels like I'm saying to you, don't worry about it. Let them do what they're going to do. And that isn't what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we get to find the varying degree of how we show up in a way that doesn't harm or enable, and it doesn't make their survival our sole responsibility. And so the philosophical space of that is how much is too much. In another scenario, I was talking with a client the other day, and we were talking about this in her context, right? And she was talking about how she shows up for her family, and she does everything that has trained them to do very little. And so now she feels like she's responsible, et cetera, et cetera. And so we were talking about what it means to actually care for someone enough to let them fall down. Now, please understand, I'm not talking about the suicide ideation. I'm talking about more of like just to make mistakes in life, right? And I said, imagine that you and I are neighbors and our backyards are butted up against each other with a beautiful white picket fence. And if I look over in your yard and I see that your garden is not doing well, because I can see how you're not planting things in the sun properly, you're not planting things in the shade, like I can see what you're doing. Like you're doing it wrong. If I walk up to that fence and I jump over and I start pulling out your garden and rearranging it without your permission, that is me overstepping my bounds. That is me judging what I think you need. And I'm going to do it for you, and you didn't ask, and that doesn't matter. Now, if the scenario is like this, where you walk up to the fence and I walk up to the fence and you say, I don't know what's wrong with my garden. Can you give me some pointers? I now have permission to look at what's going on and go, yeah, I would move that over there and I'd move that over there. That way you have proper sun on each one. That was permission. But if I come over and I just jump over the fence and I hip check you out of the way and just knock you down, and then I just start doing it, that has solved nothing. It has wounded more than it's helped. I have overstepped my bounds. I was not given consent, so I have violated your free will. I have harmed you because I devalued you enough to say, get out of my way. You don't know what you're doing, and I know better. And I have just judged all over you because I know what you need and you don't. Yeah, the plants might survive, but that's not enough to make that a healthy experience. So when we're in life and we have people that we see struggling, it's a lot like that. It's they have to be willing to come into the middle and ask for support. They have to be willing to ask for that advice, ask for that help, ask to be supported. And so there's a free will exchange right there. There's a consent is given to help. And then even like, let's just say going back to the garden, right? Let's say I walk to the center and you walk to the center and you say, you know, it's not going very well. Do you think maybe you could jump over and just like re-landscape my whole backyard? Because I know you know what you're doing. Can you just do it for me? I don't have to say yes just because I was asked. And that's the issue with the people pleaser. We don't know how to say no. We have been made to believe that saying no and honoring our energetic levels is actually hurting someone else. And so that person comes in and they're like, well, can't you just like do it all for me? We then get to go into ourselves and ask, how do I feel about that? Am I able to do that? Is that something I want to do? Do I have the capacity for that? We have the right to say, no, thank you so much for trusting me, but I don't think I can do all of that for you. I can maybe come over tomorrow and help. I don't mind getting in there with you and helping, but I don't think I can do it all for you. So my point of this very labored conversation, right? Because it's so nuanced and multi-spectrum of experiences from greatest to least, right? Is to say that you have the right to say no if you notice that what is being asked of you is actually going to be harmful for either you or them or both. Even when someone is struggling with deep despair, addiction, being destitute, whatever that heavier end of the spectrum, whatever someone is experiencing, it is still not our responsibility to rescue them at the cost of possibly harming them. So for the people pleaser, et cetera, what is really healthy for us is to find a way to support without enabling, to support without ripping up the whole garden and landscaping the whole backyard. Because that's going to be our inclination. That's going to be our instinct, is to want to go in and just overhaul this person's life because we can see more clearly than they can, whether that's true or not. So the question is, how can I support them in a way that will actually support them and not hurt me? And it's a hard space for a people pleaser to find that answer. So where I'm, again, very labored, in a very labored way, illustrating, it's also an important place to play if you find yourself wanting to be the rescuer, the healer, the savior, et cetera, because if you're in the shadow form of any of those archetypal energies, is there perhaps a subconscious desire that there's always someone to save? A rescuer can't be a rescuer if there's no one to rescue. And so it begs the question, is our rescuing actually rescuing, or is it enabling? Is it harming more than helping? And I'm very aware how this might open up a huge conversation for people. And I'm very aware that there could be a myriad of responses coming my way. I totally get it. Life is not cookie cutter, and is certainly not black and white. It's certainly not me saying like, well, every man for themselves, they have to deal with it. You've been great. Goodbye. I'm going to go. That's not what I'm saying. It's not an all or nothing situation where, well, it's their free will. If they want to die, they're going to die. No, it's not about that, but it's also not going all the way and keeping them alive. It's about how can I truly help? How can I truly support in a way that doesn't harm either one of us? And it's a huge conversation. It's a huge conversation. I've been in it. I know. I don't say these things lightly. But I do know no one person is responsible for rescuing any other person in an enabling way. There are moments in time when people truly need help, when they truly have fallen down and they need someone to help them stand up. But that's a moment when I'm going to support you by standing up. You good? You got this? You've got this. I know you've got this. And then we let them have their experience. And I liken it to, like, let's go back to the 1-year-old. Let's say your baby is starting to learn how to walk. And you know how we all start, right? We get them to like hold our fingers and, get their mechanics going, right? So imagine if you were a parent that you always held on to that baby. You never let them figure out how to get their own balance. You always held them while they walked. Their muscles wouldn't develop, their balance wouldn't develop, their motor skills wouldn't strengthen. So it would harm them more than help them. And so sometimes in life, we don't mean to, we don't know that we are. Sometimes in life, we're still that parent holding that baby, whether you're literally the parent or it's a friend or a family member, whatever, but you're that person helping them walk the whole way. And now they're 30 years old and they have no strength in their body. And I'm being silly about it, but again, this is such a nuanced conversation. It's meant to open up a discussion within you. It's meant to open up a discussion about how far is hurting people, how far is hurting me, and how can I show up for people in a way that actually helps them? And am I doing that? Because it takes a real hardcore, accountable kind of look. If it takes a hard look to see if we're in the shadow version of those behaviors or if we're in the virtue. Because if we're in the shadow, someone's getting hurt. And so please understand my intention with this conversation really is just to follow up with that conversation. Sometimes when I'm in them and I say what I say and then I ponder them later, I go, wow, I don't think I explained that very well. And so that's what this is for those people that were on the call specifically. But it's also a very big conversation just kind of put into the world. And I hope that it's received how it's meant. I hope that you're receiving this in a way that it is meant to open up discussion within yourself, to open up those honest spaces, to help you clean up your healthy boundaries within that, to have an inventory if you are in fact helping in a way that is helping, or if someone is being harmed, how can we adjust that? How can you and I for ourselves, how can I adjust that for myself so that I am being more healthy with that situation, and then watch your people thrive. That's the freaking irony of it, is generally if someone is habitually the rescuer, it means by the counterpoint, someone is habitually the victim or the wounded or whatever role they're playing. It's math. One needs the other. The rescuer needs the victim needs the rescuer. So when you pull your energy back and support them without rescuing, they actually enliven. They go, oh, I can do this. Oh my God, I am doing this. So there's a tendency for them to get it when we give them space to get it, while also still supporting. It's not about you're on your own, right? So that's where I wanted to follow up and make sure those of you that were on the call heard that. It's not about all or nothing. There is a varying degrees of range in the middle that is appropriate. And it's for each individual person and the person they're working with and the situation that they're in to determine where that range falls in a healthy area. So if you will take a big breath with me, just letting all of that kind of roll around, opening up to the possibility, right? Just being in that honest space of inquisitive curiosity and wondering what that looks like for you. And I'd love to hear what comes up for you. So if you want to comment, you want to send me an email, however, I'd love to hear what comes up for you, because it's a big turning point for a family member and a family dynamic or a friend dynamic, right? Whatever the relationship, when we give them space to figure it out while we're still holding space for them to do it, there's a really beautiful shift that happens. And that's ultimately what I'm wishing for your people. All right. Be well. We'll see you again. Bye.